You ever get that feeling? The one where you know you shouldn't look, shouldn't open that door, shouldn't squeeze into that tight, dark space under the house. But you do it anyway. Yeah, that was me, age 10. We lived in this old two-story place on Maple Street, the kind with creaky floors and drafts that snaked around your ankles even in summer. My flashlight beam swept across the dirt, past cobweb-draped pipes and forgotten junk. And then it landed on it. Tucked away in a corner, almost buried under a drift of dust and dried leaves that had somehow blown in, was a small wooden box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox for kids' shoes. Dark wood, almost black and smooth, like it had been handled a lot, though it was covered in this thick, almost greasy layer of grime. Kneeling there in the dirt, the flashlight beam now resting on the ground beside me, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the low ceiling of beams and pipes, I hesitated. It felt like minutes passed, but it was probably only seconds. The silence was huge. Not just quiet, but the kind of silence that presses in on your ears, heavy and waiting. I could hear my own breathing, raspy and loud in the enclosed space. I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart. The first thing I saw inside, nestled on faded, brittle velvet that might have once been dark blue but was now just gray and sad, was a photograph. Not like the Polaroids or the glossy pictures my parents took. This was old, really old, sepia-toned, cracked and faded around the edges. It showed a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, standing stiffly in front of our house. Or what looked like our house, but different, younger. Beneath the photograph, lying on the stained velvet, was something else. It was a small, carved wooden bird, not the kind of toy you'd buy in a store today. It was rough, clearly hand-carved, but with a strange kind of artistry to it. The wood was the same dark type as the box, smooth and worn from handling. It was simple, wings tucked in, a little pointed beak, no legs, just a smooth base. But like the photograph, there was something off about it. The eyes weren't painted or carved realistically. My gaze dropped back into the box. There was one more thing tucked into a corner of the decaying velvet lining. It was a lock of hair, tied neatly with a faded pale blue ribbon. It wasn't blonde or brown or black. It was reddish like dark copper, a thick, surprisingly well-preserved curl of it. It gleamed faintly in the flashlight beam, looking strangely vibrant against the dull, gray velvet. Whose hair was this? Lily's. The girl in the photo had dark hair, almost black. So, whose was this? Just as I decided I'd seen enough that the baseball could stay lost forever for all I cared, I heard it. A sound from deeper in the crawlspace, beyond the reach of my flashlight beam, back where the darkness was absolute. It wasn't a rat scrabbling or the house settling or pipes groaning. No, this was different. It was a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled slowly across the dirt floor. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. My blood ran absolutely cold. Panic completely overrode curiosity. My hands fumbled, slamming the lid back onto the wooden box. I didn't bother trying to make it sit right. I just shoved it down hard. The scraping sound hadn't come again, but the feeling of being watched, of imminent danger, was overwhelming. I grabbed the flashlight off the ground, the beam bouncing crazily off the low ceiling and dirt floor, turning the crawlspace into a disorienting strobe of light and shadow. I didn't even think about the baseball anymore. I practically threw myself out of the crawlspace, tumbling onto the dusty floor of the hall closet, banging my elbow hard against the wall. I slammed the flimsy access panel shut behind me. It didn't even have a proper latch, just fit loosely, and then scrambled to my feet, leaning back against the inside of the closet door, gasping for breath. My whole body was shaking like a leaf. Safe. Relatively safe. I was out of the immediate darkness, back inside the house proper. But the feeling. Later that evening, sitting at the dinner table, picking listlessly at my mashed potatoes, I tried to bring it up, casually. "Hey, Mom," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's under the house? Like in that creepy space in the closet?" Mom glanced up from cutting my little sister's meatloaf. "I told you not to go in there, Michael. It's just dirt and pipes and spiders. Probably insulation, junk left over from when they built the place ages ago." That night the nightmares started. Not the usual kid stuff like monsters under the bed or falling. These were different, vivid, disturbing. I dreamt I was back in the crawlspace, the darkness absolute, thicker than velvet. I couldn't move, paralyzed again, but this time I could hear breathing. Slow, ragged, wet breathing coming from right behind me. I could almost feel hot, fetid air on the back of my neck. After a few weeks of sleepless nights and jumpy days, I got desperate. I couldn't talk to my parents, but maybe someone else knew something about the house, about who lived here before us. We didn't have internet back then, not like today where you can just look up property records. My best bet was Mrs. Davison, the elderly lady who lived 2 doors down. She'd been on Maple Street since dinosaurs roamed the earth, according to my dad. She knew everything about everyone. Weeks turned into months. The nightmares faded slightly, becoming less frequent, but the memory of the box, the crawlspace, the sound, it never really left me. It sat in the back of my mind, a cold, hard knot of fear. Summer arrived, school let out, and boredom started to set in. And with boredom came restlessness, a morbid curiosity that began to outweigh the terror. I hadn't been back near the closet, hadn't even opened it unless I absolutely had to. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting into the familiar gloom. Cobwebs, pipes, dirt floor. Everything looked the same at first glance. My eyes immediately went to the corner where I'd found the box, and there it was, still tucked away, looking just as old and grimy as before. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. It was still there, untouched. Nothing had happened. Maybe I had imagined the sound. Maybe it was just an old box. As I stared at those marks, the feeling intensified. The cold wasn't just ambient anymore, it was specific. Patches of air in the crawlspace felt icy, like walking through invisible pockets of freezer air. The sense of being watched slammed back into me, 10 times stronger than before. It wasn't just a vague paranoia. It felt specific, focused, and malevolent. Like whatever resided in the deep darkness knew I was back, knew I'd seen the marks, knew I was scared. That was it. I couldn't take another second. The feeling of imminent, unseen threat was too much. With a choked gasp, I pulled my head back from the opening, fumbling blindly for the access panel. My fingers slipped on the dusty wood. Panic surged. Get it closed, my brain screamed. Finally, I got a grip and slammed the panel back into place with a muffled thud. It didn't feel secure enough. It felt like flimsy cardboard against whatever was down there. Years went by, decades even. We moved out of the house on Maple Street when I was 15. High school, college, job, marriage. Life happened. The memory of the crawlspace, the box, faded. Not completely, you understand. It was always there, lurking in the basement of my mind, occasionally surfacing in a bad dream or a sudden, inexplicable chill down my spine when I was in a dark, confined space. But mostly, I managed to bury it. It wasn't the picture itself that was shocking, not at first. It was just an old black and white photo, probably from the 50s or early 60s, judging by the cars parked on the street in the background. It showed the front of the Maple Street house, the big oak tree much larger than in Lily's photo, but smaller than when we lived there. Standing on the porch were a man and a woman, smiling stiffly at the camera. Average-looking couple. Beside them, holding the woman's hand, was a little girl. My head spun. Emily Hansen. Disappeared, the bird, the box I found. It must have belonged to her. The picture of Lily must have been much older, maybe found by Emily, kept as a curiosity, or maybe Lily disappeared too. And the lock of hair, the reddish hair, whose was that? It wasn't Lily's, it wasn't Emily's in the photo. My mind flashed back to the crawlspace, the cold, the dragging sound, Mrs. Davison's discomfort. Sad business, she'd said. Disappearance is sad business. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by my father's life packed into boxes, the weight of that old house settling back onto me after 30 years. Emily Hansen disappeared. Lily, the girl in the older photo, presumably also gone. The box hidden, found, hidden again by my own father. The dragging sound in the dark. The cold, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just a haunted house story, it felt dirtier, more real, connected. And the most disturbing part, you know that feeling when it's too quiet, like the air itself is holding its breath, pressing in on your eardrums. That's exactly what hit me the second I stepped over the threshold of the old Blackwood place, right here on the edge of town. Everyone knew the stories, of course. The family that vanished overnight, leaving plates on the table. The rumors of squatters going in and never coming out the same if they came out at all. But the weirdest thing, the thing everyone whispered about, was the silence. So picture this, I'm trying to get my bearings right, sweeping the flashlight beam around, trying to pierce the gloom. The air smells like old paper decay and something else. Something faintly metallic like old blood but dry. My friends, idiots that they are, were waiting back at the edge of the woods, probably laughing. Said I just had to go in, grab something, anything as proof, and come back out. 5 minutes tops, but this silence, it was doing things to my head already. Picking up the flashlight felt weird. My fingers brushed against the cool metal, the slight grit of dust, but the act of gripping it, lifting it, felt disconnected without the usual subtle sounds, the scrape, the shift of weight. It was like miming the action. I clicked it back on, the beam slicing through the oppressive darkness, feeling ridiculously grateful for that small click, faint as it was. It seemed the silence wasn't perfect, or maybe it allowed some sounds, just not the ones you expected. Okay, so against my better judgment, I didn't leave. I know. Call it morbid curiosity, call it stupidity, maybe the silence was already messing with my decision-making. I decided to just peek into the living room, the doorway to my left. Just a quick look, then I'd be gone. I edged towards the archway, stepping as carefully as I could, though it didn't seem to matter. My movements were utterly silent anyway. The flashlight beam swept across the room inside. It was large, probably grand once. My heart was doing that silent jackhammer thing again. I kept the flashlight beam pinned on that sheet-covered clock, half expecting the sheet to just drop. Silently, of course, but nothing happened. It just stood there, tall and imposing under its dusty shroud. Maybe I was imagining things. The silence, the dark, the creepy old house, perfect recipe for paranoia, right? I told myself to get a grip. Just grab something, anything, and leave. Turning around took an eternity. Every muscle screamed in protest, wanting me to either run blindly forward or spin around quickly, get it over with. But the dread held me in its icy grip, forcing a slow, agonizing turn. The flashlight beam stayed fixed ahead for a moment before I finally, deliberately, swept it back towards the arched doorway I'd come through. My breath hitched silently in my throat. Nothing. Absolutely nothing there. Just the empty archway, framing the darkness of the foyer beyond. Okay, that was it. Proof or no proof, dare or no dare, I was out. Forget the figurine, forget everything. My survival instinct finally kicked into high gear, overriding the stupid curiosity and the lingering effects of the dare. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting a wild arc through the dust-filled air, aiming straight for the arched doorway leading back to the foyer. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, practically lunging across the room. Panic flared, hot and sharp in my chest. I rattled the doorknob, pulling, pushing, twisting with all my might. Nothing. Not a budge, not a rattle, not a single metallic protest. Just that dead, silent resistance. It was like trying to turn a knob carved from solid stone. My breathing grew ragged, harsh gasps in the suffocating quiet, and even that sounded muffled, distant. I hammered on the door with my fist, hoping my friends outside might hear, might realize something was wrong. Reaching the small door under the stairs, I hesitated. This felt like every horror movie cliché rolled into one, didn't it? Trapped protagonist, creepy cellar door. But clichés exist for a reason, I guess. Sometimes the creepy cellar door is your only choice. Unlike the front door, this one had a simple iron latch, rusted but seemingly functional. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly, and lifted the latch. It moved with surprising ease, and more importantly, with a faint, high-pitched squeak. Getting to the window was awkward. I had to climb over the fallen shelf, sending clouds of ancient dust billowing around me, silently, of course. The blessed sounds of the latch and hinges seemed like a distant memory already, back to the soundless void. The window was small, maybe 2 feet square, and covered with thick wooden planks nailed crudely across the frame from the outside. They looked weathered but solid. I reached out and pushed against one of the boards, solid as rock. It took what felt like ages, working in that horrible, soundless vacuum. Each pry, each splintering of wood happened in eerie silence. My muscles burned, my breath came in silent, ragged gasps. But finally, one of the main boards cracked almost all the way through. I gave one last heave with the tire iron, and a large chunk of wood splintered off, falling inwards onto the pantry floor with a soft, soundless thud. Behind it, darkness. Night had fallen completely outside. I stayed there on the damp ground for a moment, just breathing, trying to let the normal sounds of the night wash over me, the chirp of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant bark of a dog, but there was nothing, just silence. A different kind of silence, maybe. The normal quiet of a still night. No, it felt familiar, that same heavy, oppressive quality, that feeling of sound being deliberately absent. My blood ran cold again. No, it couldn't be. I was outside. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had my friends bylaid, gotten bored or scared themselves and just left me there? It seemed cruel, but maybe possible. Or had something happened to them? Had the silence somehow spread, reached them even out here? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I had to find them, or failing that, I just had to get away. Far away from this place, from this clinging, sound-eating quiet. After what felt like forever, stumbling blindly through the silent woods, I saw lights. Distant, warm, beautiful lights, street lights. The road. Relief flooded me, so intense I almost collapsed right there among the trees. I pushed through the last line of tangled bushes and stumbled out onto the familiar asphalt of Old Mill Road. It was deserted, the streetlights casting pools of lonely orange light onto the empty pavement. But it was civilization. It was away from the house. I don't know how long I stood there on the road, lost in a spiral of silent despair. Minutes, hours. Time felt warped in the absence of auditory cues. Eventually, numbly, I started walking. Where home, I guess. What else was there to do? The walk felt unreal. Familiar streets looked alien in the profound silence. Houses with lights on seemed like distant dioramas, their occupants living in a world I could no longer access. Could they see me? Would they hear me if I screamed, pounded on their doors? When I finally reached my own street, my house looked normal. Lights off, quiet, just like it should be late at night. But the normality felt jarring against the backdrop of my personal silent nightmare. Would the silence follow me inside? Would my home become another extension of the silent house? The thought was unbearable. I fumbled for my keys, the familiar shapes feeling alien in my hand. The jingle they should have made was absent, of course, just the silent weight of metal. I splashed cold water on my face. The sensation was real, the cold shock tangible against my skin. But the sound, the familiar splash and drip, was utterly missing. It felt profoundly wrong, like a vital piece of the experience had been carved out. I looked up, catching my reflection in the darkened kitchen window above the sink. For a heart-stopping moment, my reflection wasn't there. Just the dark glass showing the faint outline of the backyard. I finally tore my eyes away from the window, from that thing wearing my reflection. My heart hammered silently against my ribs. I backed away slowly, bumping into the kitchen table silently. My gaze darted around my own kitchen, suddenly seeing threats in every shadow, menace in the familiar shapes of appliances. Was it just the reflection, or was it in the room with me now? The silence felt charged, expectant. I needed to get out of the kitchen, needed to go somewhere bright, somewhere. My thumb hovered over Dave's contact number, my best mate since kindergarten. If anyone would know what happened or come looking, it would be him. Taking what felt like a monumental leap of faith, I pressed the call icon. The screen changed to the calling interface. Usually I'd hear the faint electronic tone of the call connecting, the ringback tone. Silence. Absolute, dead silence from the phone speaker pressed tightly against my ear, but the screen showed it was ringing. Then, just as I was about to hang up, convinced it was useless or worse, something changed. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, it was a feeling, a vibration through the phone, so faint it was almost imperceptible, like something tapping lightly on the other end. Tap, 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 rhythmic, deliberate, followed by a pause, then tap, 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 SOS. Someone, Dave maybe, was trying to communicate through the silence using vibrations. Hope surged again, fragile but fierce. Dave. You ever have one of those nights where everything just feels off, like the air itself is holding its breath? That was last Tuesday for me. It started subtly, just a feeling. But then I looked out the kitchen window, washing up after dinner, and saw it. The old shed at the bottom of the garden. The padlock wasn't just unlocked, it was gone, vanished. And the heavy wooden door, the one that always sticks, the one I have to practically body slam shut, it was hanging open maybe an inch. And then I heard it. faintly at first, carried on the damp evening air, a sound that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. It wasn't an animal, not like a raccoon scrabbling or a cat yowling. It was a click, a soft, wet clicking noise, like maybe pebbles being gently clicked together but wetter, somehow more organic. Click, 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 pause, click. Okay, so maybe I'm not the bravest guy. My first instinct wasn't exactly to charge out there like some action hero. No, my first instinct was denial. It's probably nothing, right? Wind, a branch tapping, animals. My mind raced, throwing up plausible, mundane explanations like a shield against the growing dread. I finished the dishes on autopilot, hands slightly trembling, ears strained, listening for that clicking. Silence. Just the usual night sounds. Maybe it was nothing. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I owned, one of those big mag lights that feels like a weapon in itself. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the back door. The click of the deadbolt sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I stepped out onto the patio, the damp, cool air hitting my face. The fog swirled around my ankles, muffling the crunch of gravel under my sneakers as I started walking slowly towards the shed. Every step felt momentous, each crunch echoing in the stillness. I reached the shed. Standing right in front of it, the silence felt absolute, suffocating. The faint, weird smell was stronger here. Definitely damp earth, but with an underlying, coppery tang, like old pennies or dried blood. Nah, couldn't be. My imagination running wild again. Get a grip. I hesitated, flashlight beam still pointed at the ground near the door. Where was the padlock? I swept the beam around the base of the shed, through the damp grass and patchy weeds. Nothing. No glint of metal. My fingers brushed against the cold wood of the shed door. It felt damp, slightly rough under my touch. I pushed. It resisted for a second, that familiar stickiness, then gave way with a low groan that echoed way too loudly in the night. The door swung inwards, revealing the dark interior. I swept the flashlight beam around quickly, heart hammering. Lawnmower, check. Rakes and shovels hanging on the wall, check. Bags of potting soil, old paint cans, cobwebs thick in the corners. Silence again. Absolute ringing silence, broken only by the frantic thumping in my own chest and the high-pitched whine in my ears. Did I imagine it? Was the stress getting to me that badly? But no, the sound had been too distinct, too close. Click, 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 like wet knuckles cracking, or maybe chitinous plates rubbing together. The image that flashed into my mind, some kind of monstrous insect, huge and glistening, was so repulsive it made me gag. I forced it down. Don't panic. Don't. Just as my heel crossed the threshold, ready to bolt, something shifted behind the tires. It wasn't a loud noise, just a soft, heavy scraping sound, like fabric dragging across rough concrete, or something heavy slithering. My blood turned to ice. I didn't wait to see what it was. I lunged backwards out of the shed, stumbling over my own feet, catching myself on the damp grass outside. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, frozen 10 feet away, flashlight beam pinned on the dark doorway. My breathing slowly returned to something resembling normal, but the adrenaline still buzzed under my skin. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of leaves in the light breeze sounded like movement from within the shed. The fog curled and uncurled around the shed's base, making it look like it was floating slightly, untethered from reality. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Steeling myself, I took a step forward, then another. My legs felt like lead, reluctant to move closer to the source of my terror. I kept the flashlight beam fixed on the doorway, half expecting something to suddenly fill it. Each step was measured, deliberate. 5 feet away. I could smell it again, that weird, coppery, damp earth smell, stronger now, almost gag-inducing. 3 feet. I was close enough to reach out and touch the door. My hand hovered near the wood, trembling slightly. I quickly scanned the area near the shed with my flashlight, looking for anything heavy enough to brace the door. My eyes landed on a couple of old cinder blocks half buried in the weeds near the back fence. Perfect. Keeping one eye on the now closed shed door, as if expecting it to burst open any second, I hurried over to the cinder blocks. They were heavy, rough on my hands, covered in moss and dirt. I hefted one, grunting slightly with the effort, and carried it back towards the shed. I stared at the symbol, transfixed. The air suddenly felt colder, the 3 jagged lines cutting through the circle. It felt aggressive, wrong, like a warning or maybe a sigil of some kind. My mind raced, trying to place it. Ancient runes, some weird occult thing, teenage vandalism. It didn't look like typical graffiti. The lines were too precise, too deliberate, yet jagged, almost violent. I leaned closer, playing the flashlight beam over it. I turned and practically sprinted back towards the house, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground, not daring to look back. The distance that felt so long and menacing on the way out seemed to evaporate in seconds on the return trip. I fumbled with the back door key, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get it into the lock. Finally, I was inside, slamming the door shut behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Sleep was impossible, obviously. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps, every sigh of the wind like something whispering outside the window. I eventually ended up on the sofa in the living room, lights on, TV playing some mindless late-night show for background noise, clutching a heavy fireplace poker like a lunatic. Pathetic, I know, but I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. I kept replaying the events in my head. The click, click, click. I must have drifted off eventually, exhaustion finally winning out over fear. I woke up abruptly on the sofa mid-morning, stiff and groggy, the sun streaming brightly through the windows. For a blissful second, I forgot. Then it all came rushing back, the shed, the sounds, the symbol. My stomach clenched. I needed coffee, strong coffee. As the coffee maker gurgled, I found myself drawn back to the kitchen window, almost against my will. The backyard looked completely ordinary in the bright daylight. Reaching the shed, I cautiously approached the door. The cinder block was still wedged tight. I nudged it with the toe of my sneaker. Solid, no sign of disturbance. The symbol was still there, less ominous perhaps in the daylight, but definitely real, definitely clawed into the wood. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the door, listening. Silence, complete and utter silence. No clicking, no scraping, no breathing. Nothing. Okay. Maybe whatever it was had left, squeezed out through some gap I couldn't see. I spent a good 20 minutes searching that shed, top to bottom. Checked every box, moved bags of soil, peered into dark corners with my phone light. Absolutely nothing. No creature, no nest, no unusual droppings, no weird secretions. Nothing except one thing. Tucked away on the dusty wooden shelf above the workbench, behind a row of old jam jars filled with screws and nails, was something small. Something that didn't belong. It was a small, perfectly smooth, dark gray stone. I drove to the hardware store like a man possessed. Ignored the speed limits, ran a yellow light. The smooth gray stone felt like it was burning a hole in my memory. I bought the biggest, most industrial-looking padlock they had, plus a heavy-duty hasp and bolts to replace the old rusted one. Might as well reinforce the whole damn thing. Back home, I worked quickly, fueled by nervous energy. Ripped off the old hasp, drilled new holes, bolted the new one on. I stared at the strange, iridescent black strand, turning it over and over in my fingers. It felt wrong, deeply wrong. Like the stone, like the symbol, it didn't belong in this world. It felt like a piece of evidence, a clue, but to what? What kind of creature sheds something like this? Combined with the clicking, the smell, the symbol, a disturbing picture was starting to form, fragmented and terrifying. Something unnatural had been in my shed. Days turned into a week. Life tried to return to normal, but it was a fragile normality, constantly undercut by the lurking fear. I checked the shed lock obsessively, multiple times a day. Listened at the door, peered out the window at night. Nothing. No sounds, no disturbances. The shed remained silent, locked, inert. My forum posts yielded nothing useful, mostly joke replies, guesses about band logos, or links to unrelated fantasy art.